On Sunday, August 22, 2004, the Sutton family experienced a devastating tragedy following Susan's 57th birthday celebration. The celebration included Susan, her husband John, their son Christopher, his girlfriend Juliet, and family friend Teddy Montoda. After the party, Susan and John went to bed in separate rooms at their home in the upscale Coral Gables neighborhood near Miami, Florida. One night, a tragic event occurred. Susan usually slept in a separate room because her husband, John, snored loudly. While they were sleeping, a car stopped about 4 blocks away from their house. A man dressed in black was approaching their house with the intention of killing Susan and John. The attacker was armed with a 9mm Glock pistol and broke into Susan's house. He first went to John's bedroom and shot him twice in the head. He then moved to the room where Susan was sleeping, shot her 6 times, and left. The police were notified of the incident. Police and ambulances were dispatched to the scene shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, doctors determined that Susan, 57, had died. John was still alive but had suffered serious injuries and had lost a lot of blood. He was taken to hospital, where paramedics worked frantically to save him, although his chances of survival were slim. Before being taken to hospital, John said that he could not see the shooter in the dark and did not know who it was. Forensic experts began examining the crime scene, while police questioned neighbors and searched for surveillance cameras. Although no cameras were found, but neighbors reported seeing a suspicious man dressed in dark clothing running away from the house. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer had accessed the home through the sliding glass doors. The house was intact, with no money or jewelry taken, indicating to police that this was not a robbery. The attack was clearly targeted at killing Susan and John. But the motive behind the murder remains unknown. Melissa Sutton was 18 years old when her parents were attacked. As a freshman living on her own, she couldn't attend the celebration at their house. She was devastated to learn about her mother's death. Overwhelmed with grief, she went to see her father in the hospital. She described him as looking very unwell. John had miraculously survived 2 gunshot wounds to the head, leaving doctors astonished that he was still alive, although he remained in serious condition. When John woke up in intensive care, he realized he was blind. Additionally, he was experiencing severe shock. He felt unsafe in the hospital, constantly fearing that the killer might return. This left John feeling endangered. He was eager to leave the hospital and find a safe place to hide. His fears were taken seriously, so a guard was assigned to his room, and police patrolled the area around the clock. Due to the severity of his injuries, John was also unable to hear anything. He didn't hear the shots fired at his wife and was unaware of what happened to Susan. As he slowly started to recover, he asked Melissa how his wife was. She did not answer because the police had advised her not to say anything that might upset John further. He later found out that his wife had been murdered by her attacker. The news was a huge shock to him. Susan's death was a huge loss for the whole family. She had devoted her life to being a loving mother. Susan spent many years as an intensive care nurse, a respected profession in the United States. Her career ended in the late 1970s when she decided to stay at home with her husband, John, after the birth of their first child, Christopher. They made this choice because Susan had been unable to conceive for 7 years, at which point they decided to adopt a daughter, Melissa. The police discovered that John had built a successful business and may have had enemies. They also learned that he had received previous threats of violence. The police investigated everyone who had had animosity toward John and Susan, but they all had solid alibis. While the police searched the crime scene for evidence, they discovered that Susan's purse, jewelry belonging to her or her husband, were still intact. Although these items were visible, the police planned to interview John, but he had difficulty communicating. However, he was able to provide some useful information. Although he could not identify the shooter, he recalled seeing a dark figure at the door. The attacker may have been dressed all in black or may have been African American. John could not be certain in the darkness. Unfortunately, this information was not useful to the police. The police decided to speak with Teddy, a family friend who was at the party before the shooting. They visited his house for an interview. Teddy explained that he was on the phone with Susan at the exact moment the shooting happened. He heard a gunshot, followed by silence. Feeling frightened, he called the police, got into his car, and rushed to the Susan family's home, arriving just after the police. Teddy was very shaken by the attack on Susan. However, the police found his account unusual. They questioned why he was still talking to Susan when everyone else had already left the party, leading them to suspect an affair. Teddy clarified that he was not just a family friend but also a business partner. He claimed that they were discussing an urgent business matter and that he frequently communicated with both John and Susan to handle various issues, so he didn't find his late conversation with Susan abnormal. During the conversation, Teddy told the police that the shooters were professional and trained shooters. The police found this information interesting and took Teddy's gun for testing. Teddy was also called into the station for a lie detector test. The police believed he was hiding something and continued to question him. Teddy eventually confessed that he was in a romantic relationship with Susan. The police have often seen love triangles that can lead people to commit terrible acts. However, Teddy's gun did not match the weapon used in the attack and his phone was tracked to a location far from the crime scene at the time of the shooting. Teddy denied any involvement in the attack on John and Susan. Although his lie detector test was deemed inconclusive, it was suggested that his anxiety stemmed from trying to keep his affair with Susan a secret to avoid damaging his relationship with his friend John. John had a strong and trusting relationship with Teddy. Shortly before the incident, John and Teddy received one of the largest payouts in their law firm's history, over $1 million, and they celebrated this occasion extravagantly. Teddy was ruled out as a suspect, and the police decided to investigate other family members instead. An examination revealed that John could not have physically inflicted the shot on himself, so he was not considered a suspect. Their daughter Melissa has a solid alibi because she was in another city and also passed a lie detector test. The police then investigated Christopher Sutton. He had a girlfriend named Juliet. They had attended a family party together. Christopher quickly claimed that he and Juliet had gone to the movies the night before and provided their tickets as evidence. Juliet confirmed his story. The police then requested the cinema's surveillance camera footage, confirming that they had indeed gone to the cinema that night and confirming their alibi. After leaving the hospital, John moved in with Christopher so he could care for him for a while. However, disturbing evidence was discovered that Christopher actually wanted to kill his parents. He even threatened to kill his mother during a fight. Christopher became the prime suspect in the case. Additionally, Christopher had a criminal record that included vandalizing a teacher's home. When Christopher was 16, his parents, John and Susan, decided to send him to a reform school. Christopher was aggressive and had trouble controlling his anger, which made it difficult for him to socialize with other teenagers. He changed schools at least 6 times. He often skipped school. John would drop him off at the main entrance, walk to the door, but then Christopher would sneak out through another exit and go do his own thing. However, his absences were not his biggest problem. He also got involved in some criminal activities. One day, he and a group of friends broke into a teacher's house, causing damage and graffiti. As a result, Christopher was arrested and the teacher filed a lawsuit against him. The damage was estimated to be in excess of $50,000, and his parents had to pay it. Christopher's family had no financial problems and could easily pay the fine. However, his family was frustrated with their son's out-of-control behavior and did not know how to handle him. Christopher was a difficult teenager who had no respect for adult authority. His rebellion began with his love of piercings and tattoos, which his parents strongly disapproved of. Despite their efforts, they were unable to change his behavior, which led to more problems. One day, Christopher pointed an unloaded rifle at his mother and sister, threatening to kill them. Shortly before Christopher's 16th birthday, Susan discovered a note in his room that outlined a plan to kill his parents to inherit their money. Susan informed John about the note, and they confronted Christopher, who dismissed it as a joke. However, when his parents saw the note, they became frightened. From that point on, they were afraid to be alone with their son in the house. They even sought legal help, which led to a court-ordered rehabilitation program. Staff from a specialist organization forcibly transferred Christopher to a rehabilitation facility on the island of Samoa called Paradise Bay. It is a strict school for troubled youth. In 1998, when Christopher first arrived at this institution, his behavior became extremely aggressive, leading to him being restrained. Following this, he was taken to a remote camp in the mountains, where he was left tied up. The staff aimed to re-educate him through these strict measures. Typically, such severe discipline was effective and helped even the most challenging cases to improve. After spending a year in a behavior correction facility, Christopher sent his parents an emotional video message. In it, he described the violence he experienced there and accused his parents of not loving him for sending him to such a place. Upon hearing this, his parents visited institutions for troubled teenagers in Samoa but found nothing wrong. As a result, they did not believe Christopher's claims. They knew about the strict rules in place and believed they were intended to benefit troubled teens. Furthermore, Christopher was there under a court order, so his parents could not take him away. However, Christopher still hoped to leave the facility when he turned 18. John then received a court order stating that Christopher would remain in custody. The program at Paradise Bay was extended for another year, which surprised Christopher. But he had no choice but to remain at the facility. In 2000, Paradise Bay was closed after management faced multiple allegations of youth mistreatment. Christopher finally returned home on his 19th birthday, after 30 months at Paradise Bay. This situation raised concerns for the police, as his anger at being mistreated could be considered a motive for murder. After enduring such torture, Christopher may have felt the urge to take revenge on his parents. However, after returning from Paradise Bay, he changed. Christopher always showed that he had become a caring and calm son, especially in how he took care of his father following an incident. John could not believe that his son could be involved in the case, believing that Christopher had changed. However, the police suspected that Christopher had orchestrated the double murder, which was only partially successful because his father survived. Although Christopher had an alibi, he may have hired someone else to carry out the crime. The police needed to gather evidence to support their suspicions. So they brought him in for a second interview. In this conversation, Christopher reveals details that have not been revealed to the public and remain confidential. Christopher said he went to the scene of the incident. He saw the shooter walking down the hallway, and his mother Susan had been shot 6 times, information that was later confirmed during the investigation. Christopher also recounted the order in which the shots were fired and other key details. While Christopher appears distraught and cries over his mother's death, the police believe he is lying and is actually a criminal. However, Christopher was supported by his girlfriend Juliet, who also seemed shocked by the incident. She said she herself had been in shock for a long time, following the news of the shooting. Juliet met Christopher when she was 17, and he was 19, having just returned from a school for troubled youth. She described him as kind, polite and courteous, and he made a strong positive impression on her. He treated her like a true gentleman. So she could never imagine that he could commit murder. Juliet said that his parents welcomed her into their family. His mother, Susan, taught her how to apply makeup and helped her develop her dressing style. His father, John, also supported her by giving her a job at his law firm. The couple's parents supported them financially without expecting anything in return. They were happy to see the couple together. When police first encountered Christopher at the crime scene, it was shortly after he had been informed of the incident. He appeared to be very upset, and one officer noticed tears on his face. However, his initial statement to police during questioning shattered the impression of sadness. He quickly explained that he and Juliet had had dinner with their parents but left at around 9 p.m. to go to the movies. He then gave the police their movie tickets. Instead of asking how his parents were doing, he focused on justifying his actions and emphasized his alibi before any charges were brought. Police carefully reviewed surveillance footage from the cinema, which showed Christopher leaving after the movie around midnight. They noticed he immediately used his mobile phone to make a call, arousing curiosity about who he was contacting. The police quickly checked all his calls. Police later determined that Christopher had contacted a man named Garrett Kopp 31 times in the days leading up to the murder, which raised suspicions. Garrett, a police officer with a criminal record, had come to the attention of police. They suspected he might be involved in the crime. The case drew attention to Garrett's troubled past, including multiple arrests, adding to police suspicions. Police began to consider Garrett as a potential suspect. At the time of the case, he was out on bail. When police examined the weapon used in the murder, they found it to be very similar to Garrett's Glock, so he was taken to the station for questioning. Garrett had a tense conversation with the police and later admitted to attacking John and Susan. However, Garrett insisted that he did not act on his own. He said that Christopher had threatened to kill him and his son if he did not comply. Garrett insisted that the idea for the attack was entirely Christopher's. He also said that Christopher had given him the gun and had left the door unlocked, allowing him easy access to the house. The police arrested Garrett and charged him with murder, but his testimony was not enough to keep Christopher in custody. Juliet was questioned by police who believed she had more information than she was revealing. Despite their efforts, she denied any involvement and insisted on her innocence for several hours. The interrogation lasted 13 hours in total, but the police did not record it. Later, Juliet alleged that police had threatened her with arrest to force a confession and acted provocatively during the questioning. However, she eventually admitted that Christopher felt a strong resentment towards his parents for placing him in a facility for troubled teenagers. Recently, his parents tried to push him to get a job and start covering his own costs, which he found unacceptable, and this led to family conflicts. During questioning, Juliet revealed that Christopher had been planning revenge on his parents for years. He often spoke about the inheritance and how they could live without worries if he could take everything his parents had earned. However, she didn't take his threats seriously. The police had gathered enough evidence to obtain an arrest warrant for Christopher Sutton. However, by that time, he had disappeared. This was a crucial moment for the police, as they feared that Christopher might return to harm John. Fortunately, the police were able to locate and arrest Christopher, charging him with the murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father. Garrett Kopp and Christopher Sutton were eventually tried separately, and both faced the death penalty. Christopher, however, maintained that he had no role in planning the crime. The defense argued that the police were unfair, claiming that the police pressured Juliet, which influenced her testimony. After Garrett learned that he could face the death penalty, Garrett decided to cooperate with the prosecution by pleading guilty to a lesser charge, which was in his favor. He was then sentenced to 30 years in prison. The prosecution's case took a turn when Juliet appeared in court to testify. She revealed that Christopher had often expressed anger at his parents for not giving him money, even saying that they deserved to die for their actions. The defense argued that much of Juliet's testimony was given under police pressure and should be excluded from the case. However, the judge denied this request. In court, Juliet maintained that she had been truthful during her interrogation with the police. She stated that she viewed Christopher's anger as mere frustration and never believed he would go on to commit such serious crimes. After Juliet's testimony, John, the surviving father, shared his thoughts. After hearing all the witness testimony, John believed that Christopher was capable of committing the crime. John noted that even after leaving the hospital, Christopher continued to try to manage the family's finances, which led him to believe that Christopher was involved in the crime. When it was Christopher's turn to speak, he accused Garrett of attacking their parents due to his drug addiction. Christopher highlighted several moments when Garrett was out of control due to drugs, claiming that during those times he was dangerous and capable of committing any crime. Christopher also mentioned that he kept drugs in Susan's bedroom closet. The Garrett might have entered the house to steal illegal drugs. However, the prosecutor argued that the scene did not appear to be a burglary. Everything was intact, even the money and jewelry were intact. If it was a burglary, Garrett would have taken valuables. In his defense, Christopher claimed that he had changed and overcome the anger, resentment, and disappointment he felt towards his parents for sending him to a special school. He believed that he had changed for the better. After extensive deliberation, the jury found Christopher Sutton guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. The Christopher was shocked by the verdict because he was sure that he would be acquitted. Christopher received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Currently, survivor John Sutton is putting in great effort to regain his eyesight. He has formed a new relationship and started a family, and at 70 years old, he continues to practice law.